Today we will continue our literacy learning with a discussion about the gradual release of responsibility across the balanced literacy model. As we consider the end-of-year standard and work to create buildable learning targets throughout the year, our instructional process should include a plan for the release of the ownership of the target goal from the teacher to the student in understanding, practice, application, and assessment. The steps of the gradual release of responsibility include the following. In whole group instruction, modeling is key. I do while you watch the demonstration of the target skill. Within small group, the target skill can continue when students work in collaboration to practice the skill or strategy with accessible text, while the teacher provides differentiated coaching support. Ultimately, students own the learning with the you do while I watch application of the skill independently with self-selected text.
Now, when you teach, if you're teaching how, if you're teaching strategies, if you're teaching procedures, you use this model, which I proposed in my book, Strategic Reading, which is really a Vygotskian model, an assistance given to kids. I see a lot of you nodding out there. Assistance that is given to kids in the context of a task that'll help them to do something they couldn't do without the assistance. That's what we'd call teaching. Now, in this model, you start with I do as the teacher, and you as the students watch me. I take off the top of my head. I'm modeling. Vygotsky said that modeling is the tool of tools, that you must demonstrate for your students how to do things. Now, when you model, the kids are dependent because you're showing them how to do something new that they don't yet know how to do. And you're showing them, you're taking it off the top of your head and showing them your expertise so they can appropriate it, borrow it, start to use it on their own. The second step is I do as the teacher, and you help me do it. This is called collaborative productive activity or joint productive activity, where I'm doing the same task after I've modeled it, and now I invite you to take over the parts that you can do. You know, this is how apprenticeship works in trades. You know, and if you're an electrician and you have an apprentice, you do the task and the apprentice watches. Pretty quick, you're going to do the task and have them do the parts that they could do, helping you out. Eventually, you get your apprentices to do it together. Same thing in a classroom. You get students to do the task together, and you help them as needed. That's called gradual release of responsibility. And then finally, the students do it alone. That's called independence, and you assess or help as needed. In the boys' study that I did with Michael Smith, a pretty typical complaint among the boys was teachers give you hard things to do and then they don't help you. When you teach, you got to give kids hard things to do and then assist them to do it. Now, if I use this model, I can differentiate in many different ways. Because first of all, if I'm teaching a procedure, like let's say reading for symbols, or if I'm doing an inquiry, say, what are civil rights and how do you protect them? It doesn't matter what content the kids are using as long as it applies. So I can be using picture books for some kids, and short stories for others, and harder text for still other kids. So I can get differentiation on the content, and yet everybody's still involved in the common project of meeting that procedural or conceptual goal. Another thing I can do to differentiate is, let's say I'm teaching something like making inferences or understanding some deep concept like, you know, what are civil rights and how do you protect them? Then what I can do is I can be modeling for the kids who need it. I'll have other kids who I can be working with and they help me. I might have groups of kids working together. I'll get around to them when I can and help them. And I'll have other kids who can do it alone and I'll give them harder text, more sophisticated challenges that they can be doing on their own. So I can get differentiation on each one of these four levels when I'm teaching by giving kids different levels of assistance. Now let's say that I believe as a teacher that my 7th graders, I teach 7th grade right now, have to know how to read symbols at the end of the year. They've got to know that. Then I got to make sure everybody gets it. And different kids are going to need different levels of assistance. So I have to make sure I stick with it till every kid has it.
As you can see in this illustration, the level of teacher ownership and support releases across the balanced literacy components of instruction. Here is an example of the modeling setup. Today, I would like to talk about something we can do to help us understand what we read. We are going to work on asking good questions. Let me show you how I do it. The next step is guided practice. Let's read this story together, and we can stop and practice asking questions. Note this happens within small groups or pairs as the teacher sets up the skill and coaches, but doesn't do it all. This is where differentiating for the needs of your students is key.
Just as we teach swimming by gradually removing supports or scaffolding from students in order that they learn to be successful independent swimmers, we must teach literacy in the same way. For example, we know that activating prior knowledge allows someone to be a more proficient reader. The question then becomes, how do we teach students to activate prior knowledge when they read? The answer: teach the strategy explicitly using a gradual release of responsibility process. First, model the particular strategy. Second, by using the strategy in a large group setting with the teacher directly participating for direction and support. Third, by expecting students to use the strategy in small group settings with the teacher stepping back from direct participation in order to monitor the use of the strategy. And finally, by expecting each student to use the strategy independently while the teacher is monitoring the work, both directly by observing students and indirectly by reviewing student work, such as logs, response journals, and writing. Some examples of classroom activities that help students activate prior knowledge are KWL charts, anticipation guides, webbing or listing, making predictions, and providing students with considerate texts, such as picture books, historical fictions, videos, visual texts, before using inconsiderate texts like many classroom textbooks.
Finally, you allow your students to share their understanding with you through independent practice and application. I would now like you to take your Good Fit book and 5 sticky notes. As you are reading, write down your questions on the sticky note and put them in your book. Students will be able to provide evidence of their application and can own the learning on the path to meeting the standard. Consider how you release the ownership of learning in your balanced literacy block. Where might you make adjustments in your current practice? What are the possibilities?